Hi, my name is Jarrett Blankenship. I am a senior product manager from CNN. And today I'd love to talk to you about how to set up your remote team for really good product discovery. So, who am I? I started my career in technology over 15 years ago. I began as a technology consultant, which was really cool because I got to see a lot of different companies and a lot of different industries do a lot of different things, and I learned a lot. But in 2012, I moved to Turner, who's now known as Warner Media, as a data scientist and developer and product owner, wearing many hats. But eventually found my way into product management a couple of years later, and that's where I've been ever since. I am also now a dad of three awesome kids, all under three. So working remotely in quarantine has been really interesting, not just because of the business implications, but I have three kids crawling over me all day, every day. So I've learned a lot, and I hope today I can share some of those things with you to help you and your teams. So let's jump into it. Today, I want to talk about, just level set. What is product discovery to make sure that we're all working from the same definition. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges that are unique to remote teams. Then I want to talk a little bit about mise en place, or how to set yourself up for success. And then lastly, we'll end by sharing a few of the keys that I've learned to executing as a remote team really effectively. So first, what is product discovery? Well, there's two sides to product development. You want to solve the right problem, and then you want to solve that problem the right way. So for software, solving the problem the right way, that's the topic of years of research into agile development and iterative process. And it's mostly truly an engineering focus. So that's not where I want to spend a lot of time today. But if we give the engineering team the wrong thing to build, it doesn't matter how efficiently they build it, we're all going to be a bad place and we're probably going to fail. So identifying the right problems to solve and validating our assumptions, that's a really tricky part, but it's essential. Luckily, there are some processes that we can follow to improve our consistency and push our teams to be more innovative. So when we're in discovery, we want to validate several different ideas to reduce our risk of wasting our engineers' time. Right. So we want to know that what we're doing is valuable. Is this something that customers are going to really want and pay for? We want to know that it's usable. So is it designed really well? Is it delightful to use? Right. We want to know if it's feasible. So can we actually build this? Does the technology exist? Do we have enough time to build it? Do we have the skills on our team to build it? And then is it viable? So if we build this, are there stakeholders inside or outside of our company that might block us from launching it or block us from making money doing this? We need to know that answer up front. And then finally, is it ethical? Is this something that we should build? What impact is it going to have on society? And that last point, that's one that not a lot of us have really maybe thought about as product managers, but I think, in the world today, it's more and more important that we consider the ethics of what we're doing. And so discovery, this is the hardest part of creating real value for your business and your customers, figuring out what it is you need to build. Unfortunately, many of the practices that we've all learned to facilitate discovery have an assumption that you've gathered a group of people together, you're face to face, you're co-located, and you're just working together through these ideas. But now we're all remote. So how can we shift our thinking and shift our processes to support that remote work? Well, first, we need to know what the challenges are with being a remote team, right? There's some unique challenges. There's a Jeff Bezos quote that many of us know. He said, at Amazon, a product team has a clear mission, specific goals, and they need to be cross-functional, dedicated, and co-located. Why? Because creativity comes from people's interactions. The team huddles together in a garage, experimenting, iterating, discussing, debating, trying and retrying again and again. So, that's really cool. So when people talk about the magic of co-location, they're mostly talking about innovation and discovery, right? Remote teams do really well when we're talking about delivery, right? Maybe even better because there's fewer distractions. Like the developers on my team, they love being remote because we had an open floor plan office and they always complained about all the distractions. So they love it. But there's a reason why companies are building cross-functional product teams and then sticking them all together. It's because it makes communication so much easier when you're beside each other. But now for most of us, that's not really an option anymore. So let's take a look at some of the challenges that being remote creates. Well, first, we're moving from mostly synchronous to mostly asynchronous styles of communication. That means to say that we've got less face-to-face time and a lot more chats and emails and comments and things like that. This is just less efficient, and it forces us to be a lot more thoughtful about how we're connecting with our team. Second, there's more friction between people and information. So if you're a newly remote worker, you might be surprised by how much extra time and effort it takes to get answers to even really simple questions, or to just find a document or find out who's been hired or what the new org structure is. It's just harder to get to information. And then we have communication lag. So, coordinating a remote team takes a little bit more effort than when you're in person and together. So we have a natural response to set up meetings so we can get together. But then, we set up more and more meetings, they're regular, and we start to be slaves to calendar availability. And so what happens is often your remote team members are going to wait until the next meeting to bring up a problem or a question. Now, if they do that a lot, they also are waiting and waiting on their answer. So it gums up our flow and it just makes everything less efficient. And then finally, all of this friction around our communication, you know, it leads to social isolation. And, at first that might be nice, right? Like it's that developer thing of, hey, you're not distracting me anymore, so I can finally focus. But when it goes too far, that isolation starts to get into your team and creates a lot of issues with trust, right? And so, people are naturally kind of wary of others that we don't know or we're not close to. We get past those feelings when we feel like we're part of a community with shared values and shared experiences. A lot of studies show that teams that don't build this kind of trust, they will not give each other the benefit of the doubt in difficult situations. And that's really bad because the world's changing a lot and we're dealing with a lot of problems and there's a lot of difficult situations. So we need to trust each other. When you're not seeing each other, you've got to work harder on that trust. So let's talk about a few things you can do, a few processes you can set up that will help you avoid some of these pitfalls. So something to know about me is I love to cook. And I often find that there's actually a lot of common themes between cooking and product development. So one of the first things that they teach you in culinary school is this idea called mise en place. And so if you've never heard of that, it's just a French phrase that means to put in place. And it just says that you gather all of your ingredients and you prep them and you arrange them all beside your station before you ever actually start cooking any dish. So, if you do this, you're not going to realize halfway through that you ran out of eggs and you need to go to the store in order to finish dinner. So that's a really good setup thing to do. As a product team, we can help ourselves in similar ways to get our remote team set up for success. So when we get the right tools and processes in place, it's going to keep us flowing, it'll keep us motivated, and it's going to reduce waste. So there's a few key areas I want to discuss today on how we're going to set them up. So customer interviewing, how we're going to talk to our users. I want to talk about documentation, and specifically, how do our needs for documentation change once we become remote? I'll talk about ideation, since we no longer are all huddled around whiteboards together, and also about prototyping, so how we're going to validate our solutions. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about team communication. So, if most of our problems are around communication, what can we do to fight some of those challenges? So let's jump right into the first one, customer interviewing. So I'm hoping that you're already on a team that's empowered to speak directly to your customers and you're already spending a lot of time talking to them. If you're not, that is probably the subject of a totally different talk, and I highly recommend you look into it for your team and your sanity. But I'm going to assume that you are. So my first recommendation is that you build a pool of engaged reference customers. So what's a reference customer? Well, it's a real customer, so it's not your friends and it's not your family. It's a real customer that paid real money or exchanged real value for your product. They're currently using it, and ideally, they are willing to share with the world how much they love your product, right? This is the ideal reference customer. Your group or your pool of reference customers, that's not meant to be a statistically significant number of people. You just want a handful from each of your target markets who you can reach out to and talk and bounce ideas off of. And there's a number of ways to recruit these people if you don't already have them. The cheapest way, which is basically free, is to use their social media accounts to solicit feedback. So just ask questions or make a poll, start a contest, like whatever. It's free except for your time, and it might be all you need. In fact, even at a big company like CNN, this is often what we do and is all we need to do. If you can spend a little bit of money and you want a more focused approach, or you need to target a particular segment, you can always take out like an ad on Facebook or Google and then use their targeting parameters to get after the users you want. Because you only need a handful of people, this should actually be a pretty affordable approach. If you do have really specific needs though, you can always engage with a professional crowd testing company. So they specialize in recruiting pools of users, based on all kinds of really restrictive criteria, and they can get big groups together really quickly, and they'll help you facilitate. So, that's really useful in certain cases, but it's going to be a lot more expensive than the less formal options. However you do it, build this group so that you can reach out to them again and again. Once you establish a trusting relationship and some rapport with them, you can bridge a lot of the barriers that come with being remote. So once we have this group of reference customers, we want to talk to them. And the best way to talk to them is in one-on-one conversations, not in these like big, like more traditional panel interviews with like marketing panels, right? And the reason is that in a one-on-one conversation, we can go much more in depth, and the conversation just feels safer, so they share more. A lot of our experiences have actually been that in this pandemic, with us all quarantined, for whatever reason, people are even more open to sharing, and they're being like, they're sharing more vulnerable ideas with us. I don't really know why that is, but maybe we're just all sharing this experience together. Maybe being at home makes you feel more comfortable, but the good news is, like, this is a great time to be talking to your customers because they are willing to share a lot. And our video conferencing tools are getting better and better. So you should really try to have all of these conversations over video, so you get that chance to have a face-to-face connection and really build a lot more trust that way. Once you're doing the interviews, I also recommend you keep really good digital notes of what you talked about. Write down quotes, especially, very, very helpful. And then on top of that, save them to some kind of central repository. So I use Airtable for this. We create an entry for every interview that we have. I link to the notes from that interview, and then use tags to call out problem themes or anything else that came up in that might be really good for searchability later. However you decide to track your interviews, you'll find that having them in a central repository can go a long way to bridge the issue of having access to key information, right? So everybody in your team should know where this repository is, and they should know like how to get into the data, and they need to have access to go and look at it. Once if you keep them all in one place, it's a lot easier to find. So my last piece of advice for you on interviewing is just update your whiteboards and your notes and your problem portfolios and themes and affinity maps and all of that immediately after your interviews whenever you can, while the information is fresh. This really actually doesn't have anything to do with being remote. It's just a really good practice. Next up is documentation. So if you're like me and you work on an Agile team, you probably get the Agile manifesto quoted at you a lot, and their feelings on documentation. And many of us have probably, moved away from almost all documentation at some points. The manifesto says that the most efficient and effective method is face-to-face conversation. And that's still true, but it doesn't mean that there's not a place for documentation, right? Being remote especially creates some unique problems for us. First, when we were all together, when we were having face-to-face conversations, often it was like off to the side, and our team could overhear, and you might go, oh, they're talking about something that's very interesting to me. But when we're on video calls, that's gone. Every conversation is siloed, so you're never going to have any of those kind of serendipitous moments where you overhear something. So that's one gap. And, we just need to have an extra focus on recording what our conversations are about, so we can start to bridge those gaps. But a word of caution, right? When you take the product manager and you separate them from the designer and from the tech lead, there's some behaviors that might start happening as we start documenting more things. And that's that, we might start passing artifacts to each other. So the designer might ask the product manager for a list of requirements. And then the tech lead might ask the designer for some wireframes to look at. And if we're not careful, we'll start creating these document artifacts and then passing them around to each other. And before we know it, we've accidentally turned back into a waterfall team. And that's really not a place where we want to be. So our team, we work collaboratively together in the same documents at roughly the same time. We don't pass completed documents off to each other for feedback. We develop them together. That's a pretty subtle point, but it's something that's really important that I'd like you to take a minute to think about, right? When we're working together, it's like we're huddled together. When we pass things back and forth, we're really reacting and responding and focusing more on our output than we are on solving for outcomes together. If your documents are collaborative and you've got good commenting features that you're using, they become really great places for debate and for discussion. And they're almost like digital versions of standing around a whiteboard. So I tell people, if you find yourself answering a question in an email or a chat message, and that answer is more than a few sentences long, just write that in a document, file it somewhere that's easy to access, and share the link with your whole team, because chances are somebody else needs to know this information, or you're going to need it again later. Really helpful. Also document your meeting notes, document your changes, big decisions. Do document like quick explainers and one-pagers for new features and new products. But don't go back into the world where you're creating these big like 100-page product requirement documents, or you're creating waterfall artifacts that you're going to pass around. Just don't go back there. That's not where we want to be. Speaking of whiteboards, ideation is one of the big things we have to contend with as a remote team in discovery. Because before we were all remote, this probably meant we had a group of people together and we were huddled around a conference room table or a whiteboard, and we had post-it notes just everywhere, right? Like bouncing ideas off of each other, just letting ideas flow. And that's so key to being innovative and coming up with creative solutions. But that's not really possible now. So how can we do our best to recreate that environment digitally? Well, there's many tools and companies out there that are trying to solve that problem. We've used a bunch. Our current favorite is Miro. It's a digital whiteboard with all kinds of templates and things and supporting features that help you run ideation workshops. So that's working for us. There's a lot of other great tools out there as well. Whatever you choose, there are a couple things you need to keep in mind. Whatever tool you have needs to be really collaborative in real time, so your whole team can contribute simultaneously. That's what you need to do to make it feel like everyone is in the same room together. And then everyone on your team needs access. It sounds completely obvious to say that, but in practice, we're all getting pushback on the license costs that are associated with some of these tools. You need to advocate getting everyone on the same tool together, because in many ways, this is going to be the beating heart of your innovation process. So you don't want to shortchange your team here. Everyone needs to be able to get into that tool and get into it easily to see what we're talking about. Once you do get everyone in, you'll be ready to run some ideation workshops. I'm not going to talk about like formats for workshops. There's lots of materials out there, but once you start doing these as a remote team, don't get discouraged if they're really awkward at first. Embrace the silences on the calls, lean into the awkwardness, and I promise it'll get better. You just have to keep practicing, and after a while, you're going to smooth out that process to get ideas flowing. I know when we run these, the first several ideas that come through until people start to get stuck are always kind of obvious and maybe a little boring, pretty predictable. You've got to use special tactics to push people beyond the obvious stuff into the truly crazy, big, wild ideas, because that's where you're going to find truly innovative opportunities. So one trick is to use trigger questions for ideation when people get stuck. So you might ask, well, how might a criminal solve this problem? Or how would you solve this for an astronaut? Or how would a different company or a different industry solve this problem? You just need to push people beyond the borders, and you have to really focus on this when we're remote, because you don't have that person-to-person energy to play off of. The ground rules of ideation are that you don't talk about the feasibility of an idea. You don't talk about constraints on an idea. You're not worried about whether this is an idea that scales. You just want people to get as many big, crazy ideas out there as you can, and you want to build them up. You don't want to start poking holes in them until later when you really get to the solutioning process. When you do get to solutioning, I hope that you're using prototypes to validate your solutions. So hopefully you're already doing that with your team. And if you are, you probably already have some tools in place that adapt pretty well for remote work. But just in case you aren't, I want to take a minute to make a case for why prototyping is so essential to your discovery flow. So if you don't know, what do I mean by prototype? It's just a sample of your product that can be quickly assembled to test and validate your ideas. And there's many different kinds of these. You've got low fidelity wireframes, you've got high fidelity kind of clickable designs, there's technical proof of concepts, live data things, many more. I really recommend you take some time to learn about how to prototype really well. But one thing I want to call out is the value of using a high fidelity prototype as the basis of your product spec. Now, that might sound crazy to anybody who's still writing big product requirement documents with all these user stories laid out up front, but shifting from that to a high fidelity prototype forces you to think through your user experience to a much greater degree than listing out requirements ever will. And it's going to give you something realistic enough to validate with your target users before you commit to actually building anything real. If you test your prototype and it doesn't resonate with your customers, it's pretty fast and cheap to iterate a prototype. And it's a lot faster and cheaper to do that than to expect your engineering team to try to iterate production code. So you can save your team and your company a lot of heartache, huge amount of wasted time and money, trying to build and iterate on something that would have just failed. And if you do decide to build your product because you tested your prototype and validated it, your dev team's now got this rich interactive example of how it should function. It's going to make their jobs so much easier. So now it's a lot easier for us all to stay aligned on what our product is supposed to be, which is so important when we're, all in our home offices and we don't have designs posted on the wall or something we can all walk up and touch in the same place together. So whatever prototyping tools you use, similar guidance, right? You need to try to get everyone on your team access, at least to read and view and comment. And this is going to help you bring your product and your design and your engineers together to work on the solution as if they were in the same room. And then finally, we've got our communication. This is, communication tools are what most of us are thinking about when we think remote work right now. Everyone's talking about Zoom. I just want to remind you of what the challenges for communication were. We have synchronous versus asynchronous communication challenges, access to information, and communication lag. So we want to make sure we're set up for success in all of those areas. For us, synchronous communication now is almost exclusively video calls. I know of some teams that have had a lot of success setting up live video feeds that actually run all day just over to the side of their desks. And that might seem a little bit crazy, but it creates this digital window where you can just reach over, ask a person beside you, technically, a question with almost no friction. So it's like you're all in the same room together, even though you're not. I'll confess that my team is not quite there yet, but that might be something you want to consider if you really want to bring your team close together. Asynchronous communication for us, it happens in a couple of different ways. The more obvious one is our chat rooms. We're mostly all using Slack. I know a lot of people are using Microsoft Teams, but that's mostly replaced email for all of our team communication, and we have channels dedicated to different kinds of topics. The less obvious communication channel for us are comment threads in our collaborative documents. I mentioned earlier that our docs have kind of become our replacement for impromptu whiteboard conversations. So it's really common for there to be as much text in the comments as there is in the actual document. That's really great to have later. A lot of times, when we look back at old documents, we don't remember why we made a decision, but when the comment threads are intact, we can reread the debates. And that really helps us go, oh yeah, that's why we did that thing. So that's really helpful. And then I recommend getting your whole team together and creating a kind of working agreement to set some expectations around how you're going to communicate and how you're going to use these tools and what the expectations are. So you might want to establish some core working hours if your team is separated in different time zones, and you might want to define which communication channels are appropriate for different kinds of communication depending on your need. For example, chat can feel real time when we're all together, but it's actually not necessarily like a synchronous communication style. So if you really need an urgent answer right now, you should probably get on a phone or a video call. Chat's not the right place for that. Getting your team together to talk it through will, really help get everyone on the same page. So that's our mise en place. Let's review what we talked about. We've now set ourselves up with tools for how we're going to interview customers. We know, how we're going to start using documentation for our remote team. We know what we're going to use for ideation and our workshops. We're set up for prototyping, and we know how we're going to communicate with each other. But this is just a setup, right? We haven't even started cooking yet. So it's what you do with the tools that really matters. Now, I'm not going to review a specific discovery framework or methodology with you. There's a lot of information on those out there. There's a lot of really good stuff. And your work is going to depend greatly on your particular product and your particular company and your life cycle where you are. So I will share 3 keys that I found that I believe are going to really help you just improve your execution as a remote team, no matter what your product is or no matter what you're working on. And those are to be inclusive, to be social, and to be focused. So first, one of the hardest behaviors that you need to focus on is your inclusivity. Your team needs easy access to information and they need transparency. But for many of us, our default behaviors are to be a little bit more private. I'm kind of a naturally introverted person, so I have to fight against this a lot. I recommend, try to avoid private threads in chat rooms for anything that's product or discovery related. Have all of these conversations openly in your team channels for transparency. Now, it might feel like you're being a distraction or it's too much information or that you could be more efficient some other way. But when you do that, you are discounting the needs of the rest of your team to feel informed and included in that conversation. And it might not matter to them, but you'll never know when it does. So have them openly. Likewise, when decisions are made or major changes occur, document those clearly somewhere everyone can access. Tell your team when you've made an update to that doc and share the links, and then refer back to those logs constantly. Chances are your business is moving really quickly right now, so it's very easy for teams to lose their alignment both with each other and with the rest of the business. And this is just a very simple tool that can help keep everyone on the same page. When you're in video calls doing your face-to-face time, it's important to take some extra care to sense when team members are being quiet, because it's very easy to hide on a video call, right? You might need to ask for their input directly, just call them out. And, they might be naturally shy. They might feel intimidated. They might be distracted, or the whole remote working thing might just be really awkward for them, but you need their input and you need their ideas. So even if it's a little bit uncomfortable, or if they have nothing to say 9 out of 10 times you ask, keep asking. I think that little behavior goes a long way to show that you value their ideas and that they're part of the team. And then finally, in the spirit of transparency, I recommend you record most or all of these meetings and share them within your team and really within, your outside group of stakeholders as well. It's true that most of those recordings are never going to be watched. The thing is, though, you never know up front which ones are going to end up being really valuable. And it can be a huge help to team members or stakeholders that couldn't attend your meeting because they had a conflict, or maybe family things come up. It's a big problem people are dealing with right now. And so having this recording available helps them feel included, even if they couldn't be there with you at the time you talked. You might feel weird about recording everything and sharing all of these things. But if you set your default behavior to be inclusive, you can start to avoid many of the communication problems that plague remote teams. On the same lines as you just need to be social. So according to the 2018 State of Remote Work, loneliness is the biggest struggle to working remotely. It's one of the most common complaints, as we're missing the sort of informal social interactions that we were having at work. Extroverts on your team are going to be hard hit by this immediately, but after some time, everyone on the team is vulnerable to feeling so isolated that they don't even feel like they're part of the team anymore. So we really need to focus on finding ways around that and to make sure that people are being included. Now, face-to-face communication, it's really high bandwidth, right? Because You can give and receive a lot of information using not just your words, but your nonverbal and subconscious cues that help convey meaning. So you can get a lot more done when you're talking face to face. With that in mind, you should really encourage all of your team members to put their cameras on during these calls whenever possible. This might make some of them pretty uncomfortable. It did on my team. There were people who did not want their cameras on ever. And it's important to respect personal choices and personal situations, but the truth is there's a lot more to gain here than there is to lose. If you have team members that don't want their cameras on, try talking to them about it privately to understand why they are reluctant. Maybe there's some things you can do to ease their anxiety, but the benefits of high bandwidth communication are so high that it's worth the effort to overcome the shyness. And if you're a leader on the team, you should lead by example by turning your camera on. And so I also recommend just taking some time with your team to do fun things. I'll share a few of the things that we do that I really like. And a lot of them can be kind of silly, but it's not just to blow off steam, right? It's to build relationships. We have a team building chat every few weeks or once a month or so, and we just all get together, turn the videos on, and we talk. The only ground rule is we don't talk about anything work related. We just talk to each other like people. We might talk about our weekends, our plans, or show our cats, or show our kids, or show our office space. But we just talk, and we just try to get to know each other a little bit better and to get on a little bit deeper level. We can get into anything. We've also started having virtual happy hours, which is surprisingly fun and really well intended. It's actually neat because we get to see more colleagues this way than we did before. Because now we can bring in people from different offices and different geographies that really never got to do this kind of thing with us before. So we really like that. And then one last thing, I'm a huge music nerd, so I really love this one, but we've created a shared playlist on our team with Spotify each week. So every week we set a theme and anybody can come and add songs to it, and then we all listen to it together on Fridays. It's this really small thing, right? But people's taste in music can be really personal. And it's this great human connection you can share when somebody like puts a song on the playlist and you're like, oh, I haven't heard that in forever, or it's brand new and it's super awesome. You can reach out to them and it's like, oh, wow, this is amazing. Thank you so much. I just love that. And I love sharing that with people. And those connections, that's the point. Human connections build trust. And you can't build these deep human connections in workshops and in meetings, right? It's just not going to get you where you want to be. And trust is key to our effectiveness as a remote team. And then finally, be focused. You've got to stay focused on what's important for your team, your product, and your business. There's so many changes in the world happening all at once right now. It's pretty easy to get overwhelmed and to get lost in the details, and it's really easy to get distracted. You need to take some time to step away and think strategically about your mission, your customers, and how you're going to measure success. And it's not that easy. You've got to dedicate time to this. I actually have to block time in a recurring way on my calendar to set aside time for this thinking, just to keep it predictable for my team and my family that this is my time and this is when I'm going to get into these things. But the best thing that you can do is to keep focused on delivering valuable outcomes that matter to your customers. When you're overwhelmed, that can just be your mantra. Just tell yourself what do my customers need? What do my customers need? And if you just keep saying that to yourself and that's what you focus on, you'll keep moving in the right directions. Finally, use that focus to make every iteration count. There's so much uncertainty that we're dealing with right now. None of us really know when the funding might dry up or when our customer base is going to totally shift on us because the world totally shifted on them, or anything else that 2020 might throw our way. We just don't know. And if we're being honest with ourselves, we've probably put our teams through many iterations in our past that they weren't really focused on learning something critical or delivering some huge amount of value. And this is just a time to be very careful with where and how your team spends and prioritizes their time for your customers. And with that, I hope you've learned something and you're feeling more confident about how you can make your remote team innovative and how you can keep your discovery pipeline flowing and keep your team happy, healthy, and in good spirits. So thank you all for listening. And a big shout out and thank you to Product School for giving me the opportunity to speak to all of you today. And please feel free to keep in touch. Here is my LinkedIn. Feel free to follow me or send a message for any questions that you might have. I'd be happy and thrilled to answer them for you. Also my Twitter if you'd like to follow me. And I'll see all of you in the comments section. So thank you again. I'm Jarrett Blankenship.